Welcome to the debate. We all, think of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland as this charming, nonsensical children's fairy tale. But what if I told you that beneath the talking white rabbits and magic mushrooms lies one of the most ruthless political satires of the 19th century?
Or, well, perhaps it is one of the most terrifyingly accurate maps of psychological collapse and adolescent identity crisis ever written.
Right. So if you are studying this text in your university literature courses, you've likely encountered the friction between these two ideas, and today we are putting them head to head.
We certainly are.
Is Wonderland primarily a socio-political satire, like a funhouse mirror explicitly designed to deconstruct the arbitrary rigidities of Victorian authority, law, and education? Because that is the interpretation I'll be arguing. I see Alice as navigating this fiercely satirical landscape where adult rules are exposed as, well, fundamentally irrational.
And I will be taking this psychological interpretation. I'm going to argue that Alice's journey isn't about the external world of Victorian society at all. It is an internal map of the psyche. It's a deeply existential journey into the crisis of childhood identity, which is triggered by the profound physical and psychological transformations of growing up.
Well, to truly grasp this text, I think we have to ground ourselves in the sheer oppressiveness of the 1865 Victorian parlor. I mean, children in Carl's era were heavily managed.
Oh, absolutely. Seen and not heard.
Exactly. They were subjected to highly rigid social and educational curricula. And Carroll takes that adult world of rules, etiquette, and judicial authority and just strips away the veneer of respectability.
Okay, but how so?
Take the tyrannical Queen of Hearts. Her singular method of conflict resolution is screaming, "Off with her head." That isn't just a scary villain for kids. It is the ultimate razor-sharp critique of autocratic power.
Right, but...
And when we look at the justice system during the trial of the Knave of Hearts, where the Queen demands, sentence first, verdict afterwards, we aren't just reading charming nonsense. We are looking at a brilliant, subversive deconstruction of institutional logic.
The Victorian context is undeniably oppressive, I'll give you that, but I think you're looking outward, when the text is begging us to look inward.
Inward?
Yes, the core tension driving this narrative is Alice's internal crisis of self. Pay close attention to her constant physical mutability. I mean, she is perpetually shrinking and growing.
Right, the potions and the cakes.
Exactly. She drinks from bottles labeled "Drink Me," eats cakes marked "Eat Me," nibbles on the edges of magic mushrooms. Think about what actually happens during puberty. Your limbs literally grow too fast.
That's true, yeah.
You suddenly don't fit into your own clothes. Adults treat you differently from one day to the next based purely on your physical size. When Alice suddenly shoots up to 9 feet tall and the animals are terrified of her, that isn't just a quirky visual gag.
You see it as isolation.
It is the exact mechanism of adolescent isolation playing out in real time. The defining moment of the text occurs when she faces the caterpillar and cannot answer the most basic existential question, which is, who are you?
She replies, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then.
Precisely. That is the voice of a psyche in total flux. She is desperately trying to anchor her identity amidst the biological and psychological chaos of development.
I agree, the physical transformation is jarring for her. But let's examine the actual mechanics of the absurdity she encounters, because the situations themselves point directly to social satire.
I'm listening.
Consider the caucus race in Chapter 3. The dodo organizes a race where there is no starting line. The participants begin whenever they like and they leave off whenever they like.
Right.
And the final conclusion is everybody has won and all must have prizes. Then, later, we have the famous Mad Tea Party.
Which is a perfect example of psychological disintegration.
But look at the structure of it first. There is a rigid, almost fanatical adherence to the structure of tea time. The table is set, the time is fixed at 6 o'clock, but the substance is sheer madness. They ask unanswerable riddles like, why is a raven like a writing desk? These scenes are deliberate satires of formal education and social etiquette. They demonstrate how society forces children into senseless routines that offer absolutely no actual intellectual nourishment.
I see where you're going with this.
Let me offer an analogy to the students analyzing this. Imagine sitting in a university seminar where you are rigorously taught exactly how to sit, when to speak, and what formatting to use on your essays.
Yeah.
But the professor never actually teaches you what to think. The form is preserved, but the substance is utterly empty. Isn't Alice's frustration at the tea party simply the friction of a highly logical child rejecting a flawed, empty social curriculum?
Well, the analogy to empty academic formalism is entirely fair for a Victorian child, sure. But you are reading those scenes purely as an external critique. Consider the psychological function they serve.
Okay, what function?
These absurd situations don't just mock society. They systematically strip away Alice's external markers of identity. Let's look at the textual evidence right after she falls into the pool of tears.
Right, when she meets the mouse.
Yes, she tries to use her formal education to save herself. She literally recites her French lesson, asking where her cat is, to the mouse.
Which completely backfires because she's talking to a mouse about a cat. It's a hilarious social faux pas.
It's more than a faux pas, though. It completely fails her as a survival mechanism. When she tries to rely on strict logic with the Mad Hatter, she is met with absolute cognitive dissonance.
Because they don't play by the rule.
Exactly. The external tools her society gave her fail to make sense of her reality. She is forced into an existential confrontation with her raw, undefined self. The absurdity isn't just making fun of a tea party, it is removing her psychological armor.
I see.
She is terrified because her reality testing is completely failing.
Let's define that for the students who might not be studying psychology alongside literature. When you say reality testing, you're talking about her basic ability to look at her environment and understand what's actually objectively true versus what's just a hallucination.
Precisely. Reality testing is the bedrock of a stable mind. It's how we differentiate the internal world from the external world.
Right.
Alice approaches the tea table. They shout, "No room, no room." And she indignantly declares, "There's plenty of room," and sits down anyway. She is constantly trying to assert her objective reality, but the environment continuously undermines it.
It pushes back at her.
Yes, and the world's illogic makes her deeply doubt her own mind. Remember her soliloquy earlier? She asks herself if she was the same when she got up that morning and realizes that if she isn't the same, the next question is, who in the world am I?
Right.
That is not just a student complaining about a bad syllabus. That is someone losing their grip on their fundamental ego structure.
But the tea party isn't just about bad manners or her failing reality testing. Look at what they are actually doing to her at that table. They are twisting her words, which brings us to the real weapon in Wonderland, which is language.
Weaponizing it how?
By divorcing words from their communicative purpose. If she is failing to make sense of her reality, it is because the authority figures around her are deliberately weaponizing language to confuse and control her.
I mean, I think language is definitely central here, but
In Carol's world, characters do not use language to share ideas. They use it to exert power and establish dominance. Take the mouse again, trying to dry everyone off after they emerge from the pool of tears.
oh, the history lesson.
Exactly. How does he attempt this physical task? By reciting the driest thing he knows, a dense historical passage about William the Conqueror. He is using academic language as a literal physical tool, completely ignoring the actual meaning of the words.
Right.
Or look at the king at the trial later on. He reads Rule 42 from a notebook to expel Alice from the court, simply because she is more than a mile high. The rules of language and law are exposed as nothing more than arbitrary instruments of bureaucratic control.
You are treating language strictly as a political tool, though, a way for one person to oppress another.
Well, isn't it?
In the psychological landscape of the text, language represents the failure to bridge the gap between the mind and the self. Go back to her dialogue with the caterpillar. She struggles to explain herself because, as she admits, she is not herself. Language fails her because her identity is in flux. Words require a stable speaker.
But she is speaking English. The syntax is correct. The adults just refuse to engage with it logically.
The syntax is correct, but the meaning is slipping away from her. At the tea party, the March Hare tells her she should say what she means.
Right, and Alice hastily replies that she does, or at least she means what she says, claiming it's the same thing.
And the Hatter immediately points out the psychological flaw there. He says, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see.
Yeah, it's a great linguistic trap.
But it shows that language fails her because saying what she thinks and thinking what she says are no longer aligned. It is a profound internal disconnect. The words simply cannot hold the weight of her shifting reality.
So you're saying her language breaks down because her sense of self is broken?
Exactly. If your ego structure, the very framework that holds your sense of I together, is fractured, your language will inherently reflect that fracture.
I hear what you're saying about the internal disconnect, but look at how she ultimately resolves it. She doesn't just sit there and quietly integrate her fractured ego. She reclaims her power through language.
Well,
Let's look at the climax of the novel. When she's at the trial and the queen is screaming for her execution, Alice doesn't shrink away. She stands up and verbally declares, "Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards."
yes, she names the hallucination.
She does more than name it. By stating that fact out loud, by identifying the system as the fragile, two-dimensional construct it actually is, she literally breaks the universe of Wonderland.
I interpret that breaking differently.
But doesn't that prove that mastering language is ultimately a tool for political rebellion here? She doesn't just realize who she is internally. She speaks truth to power and overthrows the entire court. It is the ultimate rejection of the adult Victorian world.
We really need to look closely at the mechanics of that climax, because the sequence of events is vital for our textual analysis. You see a political rebellion, but the text outlines a psychological breakthrough.
Go on.
The trial of the Knave of Hearts is merely the external setting for her internal resolution. What actually happens right before she speaks truth to power?
She starts growing again.
Exactly. She grows to her full natural physical size. That is the crucial textual evidence. The narrator explicitly notes that she feels a curious sensation she was beginning to grow larger again, while the Hatter is giving his nervous evidence.
Right.
Her psychological stabilization, the end of her terrifying physical mutability, is what gives her the cognitive capacity to see the cards as just cards.
So the psychology precludes the politics.
Yes, the political realization is entirely dependent on the psychological maturation. You cannot overthrow the Mad Queen until you have conquered the madness within your own shifting identity.
But we can't ignore what she is overthrowing. The trial of the Knave of Hearts is the absolute peak of Carol's indictment of institutional justice.
It's certainly chaotic.
Let's break down exactly what she is looking at. We have a judge, the king, who is explicitly described as wearing his wig over his crown. That is a brilliant visual metaphor for the confounding of executive and judicial power.
True.
Throwing this isn't just waking up from a nap. It is a heroic, conscious rejection of arbitrary authority. It is the logical, enlightened mind finally refusing to participate in the state's madness. She is looking at the ultimate Victorian institution, the courts, and saying, "I refuse to play your game."
I don't disagree that Carol is mocking the courts, but the moment she recognizes the characters as mere cards is the exact moment her ego finally stabilizes. The dream state can no longer contain her because her identity crisis has resolved. She has integrated her shifting sizes, anchored her sense of self, and because her internal world is no longer in chaos, the hallucination shatters. She wakes up. The physical growth happens before the verbal rejection.
Let's follow that thread then. Let me pose a thought experiment to you and to the students analyzing this text for their finals. If we accept the premise that waking up is a psychological victory, a stabilization of the ego, as you put it, let's look critically at what she actually wakes up to.
She wakes up on the bank, next to her sister.
Right. She wakes up with her head in her sister's lap, while her sister is gently brushing dead leaves from her face. She returns to the real, rigid Victorian world.
Yes.
Changed. The stifling expectations of her gender, her class, and her education are exactly where she left them. In fact, her sister immediately tells her to go in for her tea, reimposing the very structure Alice was just escaping.
That is true.
So, if waking up just means returning to the predictability of the Victorian parlor, submitting to actual adult authority, doesn't that render her psychological victory completely hollow? She escapes the Mad Queen only to return to the invisible cages of 19th century girlhood.
Is the tragedy of the book actually the inevitability of adulthood?
That is a profound question, and frankly, it gets to the very heart of why this piece of literature has endured for over a century and a half. But I would argue the victory is not hollow in the slightest.
Why not?
Because she has changed.
How so?
The cage is still there. The cage is there, but she is no longer helpless inside it. The fundamental psychological journey of childhood isn't about destroying the external world. It's about forming an ego strong enough to survive reality, whatever that reality may be.
Right.
Wonderland was the crucible. She faced the absolute threat of annihilation, both physical through the queen's executions and psychological through the total loss of her identity.
Yeah.
She returns to the bank not as a defeated subject of the Victorian era, but as an individual who has traversed the deepest chaos of her own mind and emerged intact. The external world remains exactly the same, yes, but her internal architecture is now secure. She knows who she is.
So she can survive the parlor because she survived Wonderland.
Exactly. She doesn't need to overthrow the actual Victorian government to achieve self-actualization.
Well, as we draw our analysis to a close for this session, let's summarize these frameworks for our listeners. I maintain that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland functions best when read as a brilliant subversive socio-political critique. Carol uses the framework of nonsense to systematically dismantle arbitrary social authority, rigid educational systems, and the tyrannical nature of adult rules. The text shows us that the very institutions that govern us, our courts, our schools, our social rituals, are often just as mad as a tea party, and just as fragile as a pack of cards. If you push back against them with pure logic, they collapse.
And I submit that the text's enduring power lies in its profound internalized allegory. It is a map of the turbulent psychological transformation of growing up, where the terrifying mutability of the adolescent body and the instability of the self must be actively navigated.
Right.
Alice's journey is the universal human struggle to answer the caterpillar's daunting question, who are you? And to build a secure identity that can withstand the profound absurdities of existence.
Yet, despite our different analytical lenses today, I think we both agree on one fundamental point regarding Carol's genius.
Which is?
He uses absurdity and nonsense not as an escape from meaning, but as a scalpel to reveal profound truth.
Oh, absolutely. Nonsense is the lens through which our actual reality is magnified. When conventional logic is removed from a situation, we are forced to see the underlying, often invisible structures, whether those are political power dynamics or fragile psychological defenses that actually dictate our lives.
For those of you studying this work, we leave you with this final reflection. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland remains essential reading, not because it gives us a clear moral, but because it asks the ultimate question. Is it the world around us that is mad, or are we simply lost within it? We encourage you to revisit the text, read it closely, and form your own interpretations.
The text is always waiting for you to ask it new questions. Every time you read it, you'll find a different trapdoor. We started today talking about a trapdoor hidden in the middle of a predictable Victorian parlor. The beauty of Carol's masterpiece is that once you fall through that trapdoor, once you see the absolute fragility of the rules that govern us, that parlor never quite looks the same again.